Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea,
And I'm Valentina.
and we're the founders of the Ethical Brand Studio. On today's episode, we're exploring diversity, cultural impact, and what real inclusion looks like in today's branding. As Latinas in marketing focused on doing our work in a more ethical and conscious way, this topic is super important to us. On today's episode, we'll be doing things a little differently. We'll be asking each other questions instead of just me being the host and me asking Valentina the questions. However, I'll go ahead and start. Before I do, I just want to let you know that there was two moments in the very beginning of this interview where something happened with Valentina's audio. It's about 30 seconds total. It happens twice. And after that, it's fixed and everything is all right. So I hope you stick it out, even though it might sound funny for, again, just a few seconds. Valentina, why do you think this is especially important to talk about right now, like diversity, inclusion, and cultural impact of marketing right now? What are your thoughts around that?
I wish it wasn't important right now. I wish we could see it as something that has always been important and will always be important. But it's true that nowadays in marketing, people are understanding more and more the fact that we need to be talking to a very specific public and we need to move away from talking to everybody and having brands that appeal to everybody and move to having brands that appeal to a niche, to a specific niche, to be more efficient. And this means we need to understand our niche better and also be careful to not discriminate or not offend anyone and try to be. So how do we niche down, but at the same time are still inclusive? I think that's an important topic to talk about since we see that there's this need, but also we want to do it in a very conscious way. So I think it's a very important topic to talk about. Yeah.
I think right now also you're particularly talking about smaller brands, right? Like when it comes to maybe like a grocery store that like a supermarket, that chain, right? Like maybe they don't necessarily need to niche down on one demographic, but when you might mean specifically, I don't know, like a cosmetics brand or somebody that's starting a small business. Is that what you're referring to? That like small businesses should try to look for niches so that they
Actually,
know who their audience is?
Actually, it's something that also bigger brands are understanding. Of course, things like a supermarket chain, or there are still brands that are trying to appeal to the masses, and and that's okay. There's brands that have built a reputation that already have those audiences, and they're still working with that. But there's other bigger brands that are also understanding that it's more benefiting to them to niche to a specific target. It could be like big fashion brands, again, also like big fashion cosmetic brands, big cosmetic brand, or even food. There's a lot of big brands out there that are understanding this, and you can start seeing them talking to a very specific target.
Yeah, I have things to say about that. Most people have heard about the American Eagle ad that just came out a few weeks ago, and they certainly were niching down to a specific target audience, but like you said, they in the beginning, that they didn't think about well, I do think they thought about it. I do think they were leaning in to the political wave in the United States right now and the current climate in the United States right now, and the a lot of people are like, "Oh, they didn't think about how this was going to look or sound to people that are blonde and blue eyes." And in reality, I do think that they did think about that. I think they were finding their niche and going for that. The whole time that people were in an uproar, I was like, "You guys, they're showing you their face. That this is what they're doing. They're doing this on purpose." So, yeah, I do think you're right that, like, big brands are also doing this, and I mean, they saw it succeeded for them. Their stock has gone up since that campaign. So,
Yeah,
it can be a
I'm quite like there's a question of in that specific case is were they so I don't want to use the word smart because it's not, in my opinion. Smart
no.
is to do campaigns that are inclusive and that sell. But were they trying to appeal to that specific target in the United States? Or were they trying to become controversial? Because things that are controversial get a lot of virality, I would say. They become viral. And so maybe that's what they were looking for. And somehow when it becomes viral, also, sometimes it's beneficial, sometimes it does translate in more sales, sometimes it doesn't, but most of the time it does. So, yeah. Talking about the situation in the United States, I'm interested in your perspective, having grown up as a third culture kid. Do you think this conversation is urgent right now?
Yeah, of course. And it's funny that we say third culture kid because that's something that I just recently appropriated for myself because most of the time when people say third culture kid, they're referring to people that grew up as like diplomats' children and got to go to international schools or children of people that run big international banks or world banks and again go to international schools. It's a very specific group of people that like to say that they're culture kids. When in reality, I would say if you look at the definition of third culture kid, it's I can't think of it off the top of my head exactly right now, but it is talking about how you grew up in a place, but you have another culture that you carry with you while you're growing up in this other place, and so you're different from the place that you're growing up in. And as an immigrant to the United States, I feel like that also applies to me. I was carrying a culture with me from Venezuela into the United States, and it really shaped how I saw myself in where I grew up. So why is this conversation urgent today? It's urgent. Like you said, it's urgent all the time, but especially right now that there's so much focus on othering each other. And I don't mean that in a way that like we're celebrating each other's differences because I do think it's important to celebrate each other's differences and to recognize each other's differences. People that say that they're colorblind, that's not helpful, right? Because society does see color. Society does notice if you're black, if you're brown, or you're Asian, right? Society sees that. So if you say that you are colorblind, you're ignoring that person's experience out in the world. So that's something that we don't want to do in our marketing, right? We don't want to be like, oh, well, everything's fine because we're all humans, right? Yes, it's true. However, we all have very different experiences. And so I this conversation right now is so interesting to talk about because I did not only did I grow up as an immigrant child, I didn't grow up in a big city, right? I didn't grow up in New York City. I didn't grow up in Miami. I didn't grow up in Texas, somewhere in Texas, like where there's or in California where there are a lot of other Latinos. And so I had to figure out how to be in the place that I was as someone that was still very justice oriented. And so I am trying to tie this back to why this conversation is important today, but I feel like I have to give context of who I am and who and what where I'm coming from. This conversation is a conversation I've been having my entire life, basically. and but today as we see ads, because right after the American Eagle ad, there was a Dunkin' Donuts ad that also just brought up genetics. And it was a very strange move because it was literally just a dude by a pool drinking a drink from Dunkin' Donuts, and he, like, randomly brought up his genetics, and it was a very cringe moment for sure, but then also it felt like they were trying to ride on the wave of what American Eagle had just done, and so again, niching down for what worked for them, and I do agree with you that they follow controversy because it creates a buzz around their brand, but right now what we're seeing is that it's actually helping them, whereas, like, in other moments in my lifetime at least, there have been moments where when a brand does something that's controversial, they can get they can lose revenue. And right now, what's happening is we're seeing the opposite happen. And so that's why this conversation needs to happen right now because it's like, what are we doing? Where are we going right now with this?
Yeah, like 100%. It feels like it's just one more marketing tactic that because it works, we want to talk about why it's so damaging. And make sure that people understand it, so that they don't fall into the trap of using it just because it works.
That's what I thought with the American Eagle versus the Dunkin' Donuts ad. The American Eagle ad felt very intentional. They knew what they were doing. They knew what they were saying. They knew what they were getting into. Like that was like the whole thing what was done on purpose. Whereas the Dunkin' Donuts one, it was like, let's just do it. Like they got a lot of attention from saying something controversial, so let's just do it. And so yeah, I do think that it's like one felt very much okay. I not that I ever shopped there anyway, but I would never now, ever again. Whereas the other one was like, what are you guys doing? Like, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, it felt like the other one felt if they actually came out with an apology, and I actually don't know if they have apologized or anything. I haven't looked into that, but if they did, it felt like they had like a wiggle room of being like, We messed up because we were just riding a thing." Whereas the other one felt very intentional, and I wouldn't believe any apology that they gave, even though they did release a statement, but it wasn't even an apology. They were like, "We are all about it." So, again, intentional versus the other one that's, "What's going on, guys?"
So I was wondering if there's been moments where you felt like not represented or not seen by advertising when you were growing up.
When I was growing up, it was a completely different world. Like I didn't see myself anywhere. I didn't see myself on TV, on advertising for sure not, and or really in movies. And what if I did, but wasn't really getting good role models from what I was seeing on TV or in movies or in advertising. And to be honest, I don't even I've mentioned this before in other episodes. I used to turn off commercials. Commercials were muted. I would walk away. I would do something else. When the TV show would come back on, I would turn it back on. I was in the car listening to the radio, the commercials would come on. I would turn it down and go to a different station until the music came back on because for me it was just too much. It was like it was too loud. Yeah, I didn't really want to hear what they were saying. And once I realized that marketing was all about manipulation, again, I'm talking about 90s, 2000s, I had no interest in listening to it. Another thing is as well, I've always been very like justice oriented and a conscious person. And I've, I stopped drinking soda regularly when I was like 11 years old. I was like always a bit strict with myself and what are these companies doing, and strict with like companies as well, like people in power. I'm sure if any of my teachers that I had growing up ever listens to this podcast, they can be like, yes, like she held us to a very high standard. And so I do think that the first ads that we started getting in the US that had Latinos in them were coming from really big brands like Pepsi or Coca-Cola or Taco Bell. And I don't drink soda. I like don't really eat fast food. I do sometimes, but I don't really eat Taco Bell. And I just didn't see myself there. The place I saw myself the most growing up in as far as media was in music. But even then, again, like I was too young. Like, why did I know all the words to Gasolina when I was like 13 years old? Like, there again, it's fine. I'm fine. But I didn't, I definitely lament that we lost Selena so young because she was a really good role model. She was an activist. She talked about family, she talked about community, and her music was like about love, right? And whereas like after Selena, all we really got was J-Lo. We got J-Lo and we got really early Shakira, right? Shakira was better. She was better, but it still was a lot of like little outfits, bellies out. I mean, that was everyone in the 2000s, right? Like little outfits, bellies out, and a lot of like sexiness. And again, I was
I was
11 and like belly dancing in a mirror. But that's all I got, right? I didn't get any nerdy representations of Latinas. I didn't get any queer representations of Latinas. I had a very small window into Latinidad, especially Latinidad in the United States, as someone that didn't have Latinos around me besides my mom. And so I had to shape my own. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what your question was, but yeah, did I feel seen? No, I didn't feel seen. I ended up creating. Sometimes I wonder, like, was I a persona of being like with an attitude? And did I have an attitude and did I like talk back because that's what the Latinas I saw, or do I just talk back and have an attitude? Like, I don't know. I still to this day, I'm like, did that just become my personality, or is that just what I saw represented? And so that's what I went towards.
Yes, that's what I think. You're touching on very important points of the representation, right? Because it's not only about who you're growing up and how you can identify with other people and who they are. And so maybe because you feel connected to Shakira, let's say, then it's okay, I'm gonna belly dance because there's something like I want to, like she represents something that I have, and it's maybe one of the first times that I see it in portrayed in like a good light. And so I want to be more like that, which is a role model, right? But like you're saying, we're missing, or we were missing now a lot better, but we were missing those nerd examples of Latinas or activists or whatever other example of real people who are there doing like plenty of things. And also, I think it's very important not only for us to see ourselves reflected and find role models, but also in a way it shapes the social consciousness of people, and they start putting you in boxes because that's the only boxes they know. Latina girl, sexy, or not very smart because she doesn't speak English. I don't know. I don't know what the examples could have been at that time in the US, but
There was a lot of, I'm just remembering a lot of like Michelle Rodriguez. She was very militarized, she always had a gun on her hip and she was bad. Like she was a bad girl, but maybe not, but like sometimes she was a good guy with a gun. Sometimes she's a bad guy with a gun. But she was always with a gun. That I remember also just being like, "Oh, that's cool. That's what I like. I'm not a gun person." When I was 12, I was like, "She's so cool." And it didn't help that she was like the only, because I don't look like J Lo, right? But I can see where people are like, "You look like Michelle Rodriguez," and I would get it all the time. I'd be like, "Do I look like Michelle Rodriguez, or is she the only one with this dark hair and this complexion?" And like maybe like a little chubby nose or something. I don't really know what her nose looks like, but I'm trying to think of big lips. I don't know, but like it's like, do I really look like her, or is it because she's the only other person you see that kind of looks like me?
yeah, I have a friend who always tells me I look like Camila Cabello. And I'm like, do I? Or is it just, again, dark hair, skin complexion? Or it's maybe the most similar you've seen to me because you haven't seen much more.
I can see it. Maybe you both have big eyes. Like maybe that's like what it is. But again, I don't think I look like Michelle Rodriguez. And it wasn't until really I was in college that people were like, "You look like Selena Gomez," and I was like, I didn't even know who she was. And then I looked up like Wizards of Waverly Place, and I was like, okay, like finally there's like a Disney family show where there's like a family of Latinos. But again, she had an attitude. And like her whole character wasn't like she was mean. And I don't know, at least it was like a sweeter Disney family, whatever. But yeah, it's still just it's if there's always these tropes, right? These tropes of an attitude. And then shortly after that, Modern Family came out, and we have Sofia Vergara with overdoing her accent. We know her character and how she shows up. So then it's like either you're a Latina with a gun, or you're a Latina in heels, or you're a Latina with an attitude. There wasn't really much in the world of, yeah, of like maybe a little nerdy Latina in the lab, and I studied biology. Like I wanted that. I craved that. I like
Or a
I
very
didn't really
sweet one
see.
and delicate.
Yeah, or a sweet and delicate one. Exactly, exactly. There's always this idea that we had to be like strong and like talking back and like fighting, and yeah, there really no representation of like soft, and unless they were white passing. There were people that I didn't know were Latinos until years later, like the girl from Gilmore Girls. The daughter in Gilmore Girls, I don't know the actress's name, but she's Latina. Did I know that growing up? No, because she's white passing. So she got to be nerdy. She got to be soft. But I had no idea that she was, I think she's from Argentina or something. I actually
I
don't know.
didn't know either.
So to get back to marketing, what are some common blind spots that you've seen in campaigns when it comes to inclusion and representation?
So, yeah, it's what we were talking about. The one that people see the most and understand now better is the lack of representation of some minority groups or some culture people. That's like the one we understand better. We've seen also, and we understand more about body, figure, and shapes that have not been represented. What else can I think about?
Also, people with disabilities, we
Well,
barely see those.
we still barely see those. So that's something that maybe we're still not very much aware. But other than all these boxes and all these names and all these concepts that we now try to make sure that we cover, where I see the biggest blind spot is in the reality of each of those people. You can, for example, have a Latina girl in your commercial, but when you lay down the story and you like create the whole reality that she lives in the small advertising, how are you representing her reality? I feel like that's where the biggest blind spots are, because it's usually a narrative that sometimes is like the most known, but it's probably not the real one. And I think that's where we should put more effort into representing the diverse realities and asking people what are their realities and try to represent each of these people in the real way they live.
Okay, so then you talked about asking people their lived realities and trying to show that. How can brands include diversity in their visuals and storytelling in a way that actually is authentic and is not just like ticking a box?
I think the best way to look and feel authentic is being authentic. So a practical example would be do research about people. How are they? What is their reality? What do they do in their lives? What is their actual personality? And try to see if you can portray that story. Because I think sometimes we think that if it's not stereotypical, people are not going to relate to it. And so we try to make it more stereotypical. But the truth is, people relate to other people because they have similar lives or similar issues, or they put an attitude forward that is similar to the ones that the other person put forward. And that doesn't have to do so much with culture or race or gender. So that's when there's a way in which, if I relate to your story and I can see how similar I am to you, not because of my race or because of my culture or because of my gender, then I can see we have the similar issues, similar ways to approach stuff. Then I can feel that I'm more similar to you and I connect better with you, and all the racism falls down because I relate to you. So, in my opinion, the best thing that brands could do is try to understand the realities, the true real life that people experience, and try to portray those more than creating a stereotype to appeal to a niche.
Yeah, I just listened to this audiobook and there was a character in the book. It was a fantasy book, like young adult fantasy, but there was a character in the book that had a disability and she used a cane. And it was part of the story. It wasn't like the main part of the story, but it was integrated in the story. She didn't have as much movement as other characters because she had to use a cane. And at the end of the audiobook, there's the thank you section that they thank the people that helped write the book. And one of the people that they thanked is they actually hired someone. I forgot the name of the title, but it was like I think it was like disability sensitivity person or something. I don't remember exactly the title of the person, but they basically were actually able to hire someone that probably has a lived experience. What I'm assuming is it's usually people that have a lived experience of that thing, whether it's a disability or a race or a gender identity or anything else. And then they are the ones that like do the research of everyone's lived experience. And then when someone is writing a book or doing an advertisement or something, instead of them having to do all of the research, what they can do is hire a person that has this title, right? That they already know what this lived experience is and they've already done the research because this is their job. And then you could hire them to be the ones that see what you are bringing, like what the ad is about, and then they can tell you, okay, this is missing, or why don't you add this, or actually that doesn't even happen. Why don't we change that completely? And I thought that was I was like, oh, that's amazing. I thought maybe that the author herself had a disability and that's why she wrote a book with a character that had that experience, but I actually haven't looked it up, so maybe she does. But even still, she hired someone to look at how she wrote it to make sure that she was representing the character in a correct way.
I love that. I love that example because it's exactly what I would suggest people to do. It's true that the word research might feel like, oh, I have to talk with tons of people, but it might be that. It might be partnering with somebody who really knows. You reminded me of, I did a certification on social impact projects. And in that certification, the one of the concepts that they taught us was to, it was more oriented to projects who wants to, like startups or nonprofit projects that wants to help to fix some type of issue. And they suggested that even though you see the issue and you want to fix it and you think you know the issue, to partner with somebody who is inside or like leading the problem, associations who are helping the people who are having the issue, and in
Mhm.
general, like partnering with people who know the reality of what the problem is. So of course, that for smaller brands, it might be really hard to have a team that is where all the diversity is well represented. But you can always partner up with experts. You can always read books about stories about people who have lived every situation. And so it's about really, at the end of the day, everything that we talk about, it's about caring. So you might not know how it is, but if you care enough to know how those experiences are, you'll find a way to find out how they are and get a good example.
Yeah.
So let's talk from our own experiences. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions brands making when they try to market to us?
Okay. The first thing I can think of when I think about what people are trying to do today is that they try to use Spanglish and it always sounds wrong. Like they don't get it right. They're like, you know what I mean, amiga? And then it's like and it's like it's so awkward and it doesn't actually it's not like the way that we actually would use Spanglish. And so that I feel like that is one of the ones where I've seen it on TV shows, I've seen it in movies. Again, I don't really watch many commercials. I don't know if it's been in commercials, but I know I like from what I've seen in media, like the trying the Spanglish but not actually knowing how to do it is really awkward.
It's a very funny one.
And then but like the one I can think of that at least people like really enjoyed and really liked. And I think I only saw the commercial once, but I used the meme from the little girl in it all the time. It was a Taco Bell commercial. And I think they were trying to decide between soft tacos or hard tacos. And then the little girl goes, ¿Por qué no los dos? And then they like celebrate her, and then they just put the tacos together. And like to this day, I still don't know if the little girl says it. I don't know if she says it in English and they have Spanish subtitles, or if she says it in Spanish and they have English subtitles. Like, I still don't know, but like in my head, I have like, ¿Por qué no los dos? And it's like fun. It's a good meme to use. It's sweet. And like, I found that like very sweet and cute. And again, I don't eat Taco Bell. I think I saw a commercial once. So I could even be saying it wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. So I think if you're going to try to use Spanish and integrate it, make sure you know how you're integrating it instead of just like awkwardly sticking it in there and it just sounds like robotic.
And that's the thing. If a real Latino wrote that, would know how to write that. And you can feel when it's not true because somebody who doesn't know did it.
Right, but it's not just like any Latino, like a Latino in, let's say, Colombia that grew up in Colombia, has lived their life in Colombia, they know how to speak Spanish, but even if they learned English and speak English fluently, if they've never interacted with in English with a Spanish speaker that also speaks English and like in that like it's a very specific niche, right? It's not just because if you're in Colombia and we all speak Spanish, we're all speaking Spanish. But in the US, when like the main language that's used is English, but then we're mixing our culture in there and then there's a lot of people speaking Spanish, there's sometimes like you start mixing things and then those are the people that really know how to mix that up.
But yeah, and that's the target. So that's the person you want from that exact target to represent themselves, you know?
Right.
In my opinion, I would talk about I think I did a bit before, but those in between spots and those more like less stereotypical type of representation, maybe because I'm not so stereotypical in my own culture and like background. And I think I miss seeing more of that representation of people who are not necessarily fully stereotypical Latina, but not necessarily fully white, blonde, American, European, or whatever else. So I think that's something I would love to see more.
You mean like people that are like have a completely separate culture, like because your experience is very different as well. To if you want to tell the audience what like your background is.
Yeah, so I grew up in Italy. I was born in Italy from Argentinian parents, but also my mother's parents are Italian. So it's a very big mix of culture, both genetically and like how I live. And after growing up in Italy, then I also moved back to Argentina. I lived in Bolivia too. I lived a bit in the States. Yes, I've seen a lot of different cultures, and I've taken a bit of each culture and made which I've added to my own culture a bit of each of the cultures I've lived in. I feel very mixed inside, and I think there's a lot of people like me. By traveling, by all these experiences, I've got to know a lot of people who have this similar situation than me. And I think the more and more we travel and more it's easy to travel and to relocate, the more and more we're gonna have these type of backgrounds and this type of culture. So I think that's also a target that brands could be thinking of. And in general, I meant not only about maybe the language I speak or the expressions or the attitude. I think a lot about like physically the way you look, depending on which culture you
Yeah,
come
your
from.
phenotypes.
Yeah, it's usually very Latino or very white. And I've never seen like a representation in advertising or like in movies. Of course, there's people who are in between, but more like in the avatar, in the target avatar for the brands. That's something because brands want to be either this or that. And so I think they miss sometimes this in between.
Yeah, I think even with Latinos, it's so difficult to say to represent people by a physical representation because yes, when somebody hears Latino, they think of someone that looks like me. However, like I mentioned before, there are white Latinos and there are black Latinos. There's Asian Latinos. There are people that like whose families maybe a few generations ago were from China, but are straight up Colombian when they open their mouth and they start talking and they grew up in Colombia and they listen to music and da, da, da. We're such a mix of people as like the Americas are. And so it goes back to what we were saying before, like just represent as many people as possible. But we also talked about niching down. And so then it's like, okay, can you give some advice to people, to brands that want to speak to audiences that while also trying to find this niche, right? Like they need to find a niche, but they need to be inclusive and
It sounds
they
sounds misleading. It sounds contradictory.
so can you try to give us some advice on what brands can do to find this, to either find a niche or to be inclusive and both?
Both. I can help you find both. My suggestion is be smarter in the way you niche down and don't niche down on race or very
Right.
specific stuff. I don't know, gender orientation, and you just take that. Unless your product and service is really tailored to that specific thing.
Like a binder for a trans person or a non-binary person that wants to feel more comfortable in wearing shirts and stuff.
Exactly. So if you have a product or service that is very specific to that type of or whatever diversity that person experiences, if you have a very specific thing, of course you go with that. But if you are more on like a generic thing, try to niche down on values, on ways we live life, on different things that are more psychographic than demographic. And then when you present those psychographic, show how different demographic can have that same value, that same experience, that same culture. So in the example you just said, let's say we want to target the Latino community because we have a service that really appeals to them. Can we show how in like in the visuals, in the video, in the way we speak or the stories we create, can we show how there's different Latinos experiences different realities, but how they all might benefit from our services or our products?
Yeah. No, I love that example. I love the idea to focus on, you said psychographic,
Psychographic.
which I've never heard before, but I'm assuming is like the emotional or the more like brainy thing side of people's personalities or lived experiences versus their physical.
Correct.
And then what I thought of when you said that was I studied biology. I care about conservation. I care about the world and climate change, things like that. And so if someone shows someone that looks like me working in the field or doing research or taking care of the planet, then that would really appeal to me, right? Whether it's an outdoor company that's trying to preserve nature or an animal or something specific, but in their advertising, they still need to get clients. They show people who are different conservationists, different types of people that look differently, and people, yeah, yeah. I just wanted to give an example because I liked the idea of a what was it?
Psychographics.
I like the idea of psychographics instead of demographics.
Yeah. So in your example, we're taking all the, it's like your personality, your values, like we said, but also your interest and like your field of work. Maybe something about your degree or something about the type of work you do. It's all of that. It's psychographics. And if I were to suggest a brand that is doing that type of businesses, then I would say take all of this psychographic and represent it in different demographics. So represent it with a girl, with a guy, with non-binary people, with younger people, with older people, and with different culture people, and show how all of them could use your product or service because probably they can. So it doesn't make sense to just
Right.
show one type of demographic using your product or services. It and this takes me to something that it's super important that we talk about, and it's there's a concept that it's that we call bias, right? But like in the sense of if I'm from a specific cultural background, it's gonna be more common that I use people from that same specific background in my visuals, and I hire people. There's a huge conversation around this on the hiring part of businesses, but it's the same. It's more likely that I put people like me in the visuals that I create, and that's something we have to try to be very mindful at when choosing the images that we choose, the videos that we choose, the story that we choose, and make sure that they are inclusive.
Exactly, because you can have unconscious bias, but they're only unconscious while they're unconscious. But once you can work on making them conscious and then not being biased. So always thinking about, okay, who am I missing here, maybe, or what other perspective can I get?
Which you also have to balance with wanting to push more the minorities. Because, for example, in our studio, we're all Latinas and we're all women. And that's not necessarily because of bias, but because we want to push and help these minorities more. So that doesn't mean we only work with Latinos and women. We do have a lot of collaborators that are not Latino, that are male, and we are open to work with all people. But that's also a very fine line between purposely choosing a minority that we want to help and the bias. So how do you communicate that? It's important specifying that you're doing it on purpose because you want to promote something. It helps. Like if we say, if we're trying to promote more women in business and Latinos getting like farther in their careers, it does make sense. Like people will understand that if we are male, white, cisgender, we want to push more of that.
Because there's power dynamics to it too, right? Like you mentioned, the white cis male has in society has more power than like women and Latinas do, just because of the hierarchy of society and the way that it's been built.
So yeah, there's this fine line that we want to make sure that we do it on purpose to help shift power dynamics.
So let's imagine that every brand adopted a more conscious and inclusive approach tomorrow. What ripple effect do you think it would have on society?
Oh, these questions where I can get to imagine my perfect world. I love them. I think we would see a lot less racism, a lot less discrimination in general. Advertising, as all entertainment and media does, is put ideas in your head. It's putting ideas in people's head. And if those ideas that we're putting in people's head were about connecting more and feeling more similar and both being more represented and both seeing how we're similar to others and more than how we're different to them, I think that could only bring more connection, a more human way to live, a more kind society, a more loving society.
Yeah, because once you start to see people, as like you said, not all of us are nerdy, outdoorsy people, but a lot of us are, and a lot of different looking people are. And if you could just agree on the values, you would probably have a wider range of people to like choose from, to talk to and be around. And when you only choose based on demographics, then you really limit yourself completely. And I would say this as someone that grew up in a small town, if I hadn't found like values to find in common with the people around me, and if I would have just chosen to only be in my demographic, I would have had to wait until I was like 14, 15 years old to see anyone else in my town that spoke Spanish. It's like we just weren't there. And so I would have been alone most of my life. And so what I did was I found other people that wanted to play outside and look at bugs, and I found theater kids, and I was in theater. And I found other ways to connect with people, and that's what we should all be doing.
So for you, it was mandatory. And that's how you polished your edges and you had to find ways to connect with other people. Most of the people don't have to because they grow up
Mm.
in societies that everything is like them. And sometimes these people have tinier things that are different, but because they're not so big, maybe they don't do much effort or they don't realize or they don't look for how or where those people are, and they still feel alone, like you're saying. So
Yeah.
there's so many points in which not finding people who we can connect with makes us feel alone, like bigger ones, smaller ones, and also those either push us to do it more or do it less. But if in general the conversation was around acknowledging that we are different and acknowledging we have these either tiny differences or bigger differences, and that doesn't matter because we can still connect with different things, and also we can find our tribe. We can find the people who are like us. Having those two messages, I think, would change so much this feeling of loneliness that at the end of the day we all have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is definitely a message I want to keep pushing through the brands that we work with. And I think it's like you're saying, probably the fact that we have had these different experiences in our life makes us more aware of all these differences and all these needs. And I hope that we can, through the podcast we're doing, through the content we're doing, and through the work we do with brands, that we can open up those conversations and get people to see these things more and more. Because I know most people, it's just that they didn't experience it. It's not that they don't want to see them. It's just that it's something that they maybe don't realize that exists.
Right, because at the end of the day, we end up being more empathetic because we grew up in places where everyone looked different from us, and we had to see them as people because that's what they are. And so we carry that with us in our company as a marketing studio. We it's easy for us to see other people and to see where they're coming from or see what they're trying to show or who they're trying to target. And of course, we'll still always need to collaborate with others to make sure we're doing it right, but it's easier for us to connect.
Yes, yes. And also I think it's something that, like I was saying before, it's in a bigger way or a smaller way we all have. So it's just for us because it was a big thing for us. It's just something that we can show and talk about so that people can connect with that part of them that might be smaller, but they know how it feels to feel different. I think we all know how it feels to feel different in some sort of way, maybe bigger or smaller. But if you know how it feels to feel different and you like can really connect to that part of you, then it gets easier to make marketing in a way that it's conscious and ethical and inclusive. So that's my hope.
Yeah, that would be a beautiful society, right? A lot less discrimination, a lot less racism, and a lot more inclusivity and less loneliness. So I love that. I agree with you. So thank you for your conversation today. This was a lot of fun. And thank you to our listeners for listening. If you liked anything about our conversation, please comment below. If you have any questions about what we talked about, please let us know. And of course, an easy way to support us that's for free is just to share this podcast with as many people as you know. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Ethical Brand Podcast. If something we said sparked a thought or shifted your perspective, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on all socials at The Ethical Brand Studio or head to theethicalbrandstudio.com to learn more about how we support conscious brands, artists, and nonprofits. And if you're enjoying the podcast, one of the best ways to support us is by sharing it with a friend or leaving a review on your favorite platform. It helps more people find us and keep these conversations going. Until next time.